Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to talk about some of my recent reads, particularly focused on thrillers and horror. Let's get into the books. First, I want to start by talking about thrillers, and I read Jane Doe by Victoria Helen Stone. And this I heard about from Lisa from Books and Smiles, who is a fantastic booktuber who reads a lot of thrillers, so I will link her channel down below. But this book just sounded right up my alley, and it's about a woman who is actually a sociopath and has that personality disorder, and her best friend has died, or rather committed suicide, after the breakup with this terrible boyfriend who treated her so badly. And so Jane decides to basically change her identity and meet this man and basically ruin his life. And I love the premise of that. It's definitely the kind of story that is a bit larger than life, and you do have to suspend your disbelief. But I knew the premise up front, and so I just went along with the story, and it was fantastic. I listened to this on audio, which definitely improved the experience, and it was just a really great narrative story that just really sucked me in. I got very attached to the main character's voice. She is just unapologetic and lacks that emotion, which is something actually I really enjoy in stories. I love stories, especially thrillers, that just don't have a lot of emotions in them. So a story about a sociopath works really well for me. However, while I enjoyed 90% of the story, I do have to mention that I was very let down by the ending. It just wasn't very punchy for me. I really wanted this amazing destruction of this man, and I just found the actual conclusion a little bit lackluster, and just some of the things that got wrapped up were just not what I wanted, and it just comes down to my personal taste and what I like in a book. But if that sounds like something you would enjoy, if that sounds fun, I do recommend it. It was definitely enjoyable, especially on audio, and it was, just a lot of fun. Next, I read a book called The Invited by Jennifer McMahon. I actually got an e-copy from NetGalley in order to review it. This was a book that I put on my most anticipated releases of 2019, and so I was very excited to check it out. If that author sounds familiar, that's because she also wrote The Winter People, which is one of my favorite suspense stories. And this one sounded like it had a similar premise, so I did want to pick it up. And this is about a couple that move to a place in the countryside and decide to build their dream home. However, the land that they have chosen to build on has a history to it. There is generations of women in this particular family that all died in very strange and mysterious ways quite young, and so it's a question of whether or not this land is perhaps haunted, if it's a ghost story, or if there's something else going on. And I thought the premise was better than the execution, unfortunately. I was let down by this one. And for me, it came down to the fact that this book couldn't quite decide whether or not it was a horror book, whether or not it was suspense or a thriller. It kind of edged the different lines, but it didn't really go far enough in any direction. It follows a couple different perspectives, one being the couple itself and also a young girl that gets involved in their lives. And it just was very forgettable, and I just don't think it was as good as I hoped it would be. Because I love The Winter People so much, I have just been waiting for another Jennifer McMahon book to live up to that. But I've read a few of them now, and unfortunately none of them really fit that bill. So if you enjoy all of her other work, maybe still pick this one up. But for me, it was pretty lackluster, pretty forgettable, and not one I would personally recommend, unfortunately. And finally, for thrillers, I read Confessions by Kanae, Minato, and this is a Japanese thriller, which is probably why I just butchered that author's name. But this is about a school teacher who decides to seek revenge on her students after the unfortunate tragic death of her own daughter. And this story is unique. It's told from a few different perspectives, and basically there's, I think, 4 different perspectives that are all recounting and going over the same events surrounding this young girl's death. And so the story is a little bit repetitive in places, and I didn't completely love it, but definitely had some intense moments to it. I did listen to it on audio, which I think was a really good way to experience the story. The audiobook narrators were good, although I should mention that I don't think they were actually of Japanese descent, so you didn't really have that authentic accent in there. But regardless, it was a very intense story. I think it's a really good way to experience or try out Japanese thrillers because there is a certain style to them. They really go over the top. They are really punchy and just really go there. And so I did like those aspects to it. I never fully connect with the characters when it comes to translated horror and thrillers in the Japanese genres. So it's something that I liked but didn't love. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars. I don't want to say much about the plot because it really is one you got to experience for yourself, and I don't want to spoil anything. But if you like those more intense stories, particularly if you like Japanese styles of horror and thrillers, then you should definitely pick this one up. It's not my personal favorite flavor, but I am trying to read more translated works in these two genres. So it is one that I'm glad I read, and I'll definitely try out more by the author. And now I've got to talk about horror, and I read The Devil in Silver by Victor LaValle. And this is more of a literary version of horror. It's not scary at all in the traditional sense. It follows a man named Pepper who gets involved in a bit of a fight with some police officers, and rather than booking him through the police precinct, decide to drop him off at a mental institution, and he ends up staying there much longer than expected. And so the story is about his time in this institution, working and dealing with the other patients. And there is a horror element to the story, but like I said, I feel like it's much more on the side of literary. If you're expecting a scary story, I didn't find this one scary at all. I listened to this on audio, and I think that really enhanced the experience for me. I definitely listened to a lot of audiobooks in the last little while. But what works so well is that I really got attached to the characters, which surprised me. I'm much more of a plot reader than a character reader, but I do think that Victor LaValle is just a very good writer. And the fact that he just got me really interested in the story, even though not a lot really happens on the page. Typically, I need much more of a narrative drive in order to hold my attention, but this one just worked well. So while it's not terrifying or scary or anything like that, if you are someone who enjoys a very character-focused story, this is definitely one to pick up. I am trying to read more diverse horror this year, and I definitely plan on reading more by this author because I was very impressed by his writing, and it was just a very interesting, enjoyable read. And finally, I want to mention one graphic novel because it is in the horror genre, and that is Wraith by Joe Hill. And I had no idea, but apparently he made a graphic novel all based around Nosferatu, his fantastic novel that I love so much. This is a prequel to it that is basically a backstory to the main villain, Charlie Manx, who is one of my all-time favorite horror villains. And it just provides all this backstory. First, I definitely recommend reading the original material first. I noticed reading through the Goodreads reviews that pretty much all the 2- and 3-star reviews that were just lower were people who had picked up the graphic novel without knowing the backstory. And so you got to read the novel first, but if you have and you are looking for more in the universe, this is an interesting one to pick up. I do have to say that I almost DNF'd it because while I like the story so much, I think Joe Hill is a fantastic writer and storyteller. I hated the illustrations. I thought they were ugly and just unappealing, and I put down this book so many times because I just was so turned off by the artwork style. I'm kind of picky when it comes to graphic novels. But I like the story enough, like I said, I really do enjoy Joe Hill's writing, that I did push through, and I think I gave it around 3 stars. So love the story, hated the artwork. Maybe look up the artwork online for yourself to kind of see if it's something you can tolerate. So if you just want to spend more time in Christmas land, if you love Charlie Manx as much as I do, this might be worth picking up. But regardless, I'm still glad I checked it out for myself and was really excited to find out that it even existed because I had no idea. I feel like no one talks about it online. So that's it for my recent reads, talking about thrillers and horror. As always, I'd love to know if you've already read them, if you liked them, didn't like them. And as well, if you haven't, perhaps let me know if you're planning on picking up any of the books I recommended today. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.